Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Hey, Danielle Walker here. I'd love for you to check out my online boutique, Lux Lion. My mission for Lux Lion is to showcase innovative African designers and sustainable, mission-driven brands. To do that, I bring you stunningly beautiful handcrafted jewelry and accessories from some of my absolute favorite places on earth. Small batch wholesale for storefronts is also available. Join me in celebrating African artistry and shop now at luxlion.us. Use promo code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your purchase. Welcome to the State of Freedom, everybody. It is Thursday, September 4th, 10 a.m. Central, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Chris Alexander. We're coming to you live on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook. Wherever you're watching, please give us a thumbs up, give us a like, share it, retweet it, whatever it is. It helps gain visibility. It helps us get our numbers up. Comment in the chat. We love to hear your thoughts, and we want you to participate here with us this morning. Well, we are so honored, and I'm going to bring our guest in now to have. We're so honored today to have Colonel Sean Smith joining us. He is an authority when it comes to cyber threats, national defense, and complex technology. So I want to give a little bit more background than usual. Colonel Sean Smith retired as an Air Force colonel with over 25 years of active duty in space and missile operations. He was director and test manager for operational testing of weapon systems, a U.S. Air Force fellow to the RAND Corporation, installation and squadron commander, and he spent 4 years as a senior military evaluator for space, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems under director, operational test and evaluation, Office of the Secretary of Defense. He was exercising oversight of test, design, execution, reporting, and advising Congress and senior Department of Defense leaders on operational effectiveness and suitability of critical complex DoD space programs costing over $45 billion. He's also been a consultant on adversarial assessment, special projects for the Department of Defense. All that to say, a lot of that was over my head. So uh, I don't ask me about any of that, but he is more than qualified to speak into the security of our election systems, which is our topic for today. Colonel Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
What a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
Hold on, Chris. Hold on. Let me get to the scripture of the day before you get off to the races. Today's scripture is Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13, and it says this: "Now, my beloved ones, I have saved these most important truths for last. Be supernaturally infused with strength through your life union with the Lord Jesus. Stand victorious with the force of his explosive power flowing in and through you. Put on God's complete set of armor provided for us so you will be protected as you fight against the evil strategies of the accuser. Your hand-to-hand combat is not with human beings, but with the highest principalities and authorities operating in rebellion under the heavenly realms, for they are a powerful class of demon gods and evil spirits that hold this dark world in bondage. Because of this, you must wear the armor that God provides so you're protected as you confront the slanderer, for you are destined for all things and will rise victorious." And one of our friends who's been listening to the State of Freedom from the very beginning, Tim Babin, had a health scare this past week. And when I touched base with him, he was so thankful for the prayers and support that everybody sent his way in the visits. And we just talked about how prayer and communion were weapons that successfully brought him through to the other side of that. And I think it's appropriate that the Lord's reminding us today that we're in a spiritual battle against demonic forces. We're not in a spiritual battle against our kids, our coworkers, siblings, or spouse. We're fighting against demons who stir up trouble, division, and speak lies and bring discord. So we have to be alert. We need to really recognize the source of any trouble that's going on in our lives. This is not a business as usual time to be alive. We need to have spiritual eyes to perceive what's going on. We need to ask the Lord for his battle strategies for the situations we face. And let's put on the full armor of God every single day so we can remain protected, and keep in mind that our Savior has already won. So we are fighting from a place of eternal victory. We used to say that a lot, and I think it's a good reminder. We're fighting from victory.
You know what, Danielle? That was one of the first things you ever told me, was that as Christians, we are fighting from a position of victory
Yeah,
because Christ has already won the battle. And as we know, Satan is the father of lies and the father of deceit. And,
that's right.
our election system, one could argue, is the child of deceit and lies. Our electronic voting system, which is what our great guest, whose qualifications really read like a who's who when it comes to cybersecurity, missile defense, both in and out of the military. Colonel Smith, what a pleasure to have you on the State of Freedom today to talk about elections for a little bit.
Thanks for having me. I looked back through some of your prior guests and saw you've talked to people that I work with, and kind of got started with here, like Dave Clements and Mark Cook and John Mills. All of us have had so many discussions. You talk about that the armor of God. I was thinking about that. Mike. I work with Mike Lindell, and he and I kind of had instant rapport because of our mindset and mentality towards things. There's a sort of a unshakable faith, and there's a little bit of humility, maybe not maybe not enough humility. Maybe there's never enough humility. Some people have that are not suffering from that, but
not excessive modesty, not a problem just yet.
yeah. No, I'm the most. No, there's always humility, but he and I have the similar background where we both been dead. We both should still be dead. We're have this kind of background where you just think, why is this guy here?
Yeah.
And both of us have the same feeling that our lives prepared us.
Yeah, there's no question. And clearly, it seems like your life has prepared you to be where you are right now and doing what you're doing. I want to read quickly from a declaration that you made. I think it was in connection with your expert testimony, perhaps in another court, but it kind of sums up your position, and I think the position of increasing number of Americans. So I wanted to read this. It's obviously your words. Given my background, experience, education, and training, and now my exposure to and understanding of the technology employed in U.S. election systems, my conclusion is that U.S. elections are critically vulnerable to exploitation by foreign adversaries through supply chain compromise of our computerized election systems. Colonel Smith, it doesn't sound like we're very safe. Our Secretary of State down here is about to invest $150 million into new voting equipment. Doesn't sound like that is very wise.
No, that's insane. It's part of the problem for the public officials, especially like secretaries of state. Most of them, are attorneys, like a lot of politicians
Mhm.
are. And I've got some attorneys, that I work with that I really like, some just really good, sound people. Most of them were something else before they became an attorney, and that life experience, and that sort of instinct among them. Like I think of like Kurt Olson, who was a Navy SEAL, or John Case, who was a naval flight officer. These guys are, they've got a steel backbone. They're moral. They love their country. They would not pervert, distort or circumvent the law. But a lot of attorneys, my experiences are not like that. And so then you end up with politicians that are drawn very largely from the attorney class, and they don't know a lot outside of the law frequently.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't even know the law, and that's been my experience with election law and other laws, or they don't care about it, which is worse. But you get somebody like Landry in office, and I spoke to her predecessor. I've never spoken to Secretary Landry. I've spoken to her predecessor, and they just don't know. They're told something by people they consider experts, but they get this propaganda from institutions that we've allowed to, in essence, take over from the American people in controlling our government, including our elections. So you like National Association of Secretaries of State, National Association of State Election Directors, the Election Assistance Commission, CISA to some extent. A lot of the private sort of NGOs like CIS, Center for Internet Security, or CEIR, David Becker's group. That there's elections group with Noah Pretz and those guys. So there's this cast of usual suspects that have inculcated their way into the institutions. The institutions have a common narrative in their training. So you're a Secretary of State. Maybe you were straight and ethical when you got into office. Probably not, given this election system, but it's possible in some places. Accents get through, right? I think President Trump they didn't see him coming. And he had so much popular support that their normal techniques in 2016, were insufficient to keep him out of office. But in a lot of places, people aren't paying attention. So you get somebody like Miss Landry in office. She doesn't know up from down when it comes to the technology. And so they tell her, oh, this is so secure. The federal government tests and certifies it. We got standards, man, the standards and the security and the defensive layers. There's so many layers, and then you get somebody like Clay Parikh, who actually tested the voting systems, in the voting system testing lab for security as a contractor, because the labs themselves didn't have anybody who was capable of doing the security testing. And then he had this background with Department of Defense security testing for cyber, and they wouldn't let him do what he knew how to do for critical infrastructure. And then he tested the systems. He was into every single one of them, 5-10 minutes tops. Some of them as little as 2 minutes. He was bypassing every single safeguard that they say they've got. He verified that they weren't configured.
When was this, Colonel?
He tested for 9 years. I want to say from 2009 to 2018. Clay Parikh was doing that.
Yeah.
He was doing it as a side gig. His real job was Army Threat System Management Office, which is like the red teams within the U.S. Army. Those are some of the best in the country, actually. TSMO, Threat System Management Office, and NSA. From my experience, I would say those are probably the best red teams across national security. You've got Air Force and Navy has teams, and there's really good people. But as far as teams go and their approach, TSMO and NSA, in my experience and what I observed, were kind of the highest level, closest to advanced persistent threat.
Yeah.
So he did that for 9
Colonel
years.
Smith,
Three
would
different
you
labs.
would you just maybe break that down for non-tech people? The red team, that's a cyber threat team.
Yeah, so we have, within the Department of Defense, national security architecture, you have all of these systems that you rely upon. They're all mission critical. Maybe you have something that is, you're using it for mechanical engineering drawings or something like that, and that's not mission critical. But for everything that's mission critical, the threat against U.S. national security systems and organizations is just sky high. It's higher than anybody can imagine. When I was at U.S. Space Command I was doing space control. So my job was offensive space control at U.S. Space Command for about 4 years. It was my job to know technically all of the capabilities in the U.S. inventory, all the capabilities in foreign adversary hands, how to employ them against one another, how to protect systems. That's what I did. I was a technical expert for that. I was pretty much the technical expert for that in the Department of Defense. And then computer network defense came in. That's what we called cyber operations at the time, computer network attack and defense. And that hadn't really had a home in the military. There was some of it that was done, but it wasn't treated like a warfighting domain. Okay. When they brought that in, they gave it to U.S. Space Command because the other joint force commands, the U.S. Strategic Command and all those, they didn't want it. It was like a redheaded stepchild. And because I worked in the vault, what was called special technical operations for space operations at the time, I was the technical expert. And so the colonels came to me and said, hey, ICE, you write the computer network attack and defense operational procedures, because you wrote the ones for offensive and defensive space control. And I said, I don't know anything about computer network defense and attack. And they said, we don't really care. You better go do it. Because that's how that works in the military. They just tell you to do stuff. Mm-hmm. So I went and found these guys who did know about it, guys who were consultants or contractors, and they helped me. And the procedures we wrote were terrible. My fault. I didn't know. You don't know what you knew. But this was over 25 years ago. And then I can remember just so clearly, we had called in all the intelligence community liaisons because we were going to tell them, as now the combatant command for cyber, effectively, we were going to tell them this is what our operational requirement is for intelligence support. And I can remember standing up in front of them. I was giving them this briefing, and this is, representatives from NSA, CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember standing up in front of them and saying, Department of Defense computer networks and computers are being attacked 1 million times per year. And they were shocked. They were shocked into silence. I'm in the room. This was a room. I'm standing up in front, imagine an Air Force captain in uniform, it's probably in a flight suit. And they were you could have heard a pin drop in this room. And these are senior, experienced intelligence people. The idea that we would be attacked 1 million times a year shocked them. Department of Defense networks and national security systems are attacked millions of times a day now.
Wow.
Right? Chinese advanced persistent threat teams are literally pinging every single IP address in the world every single day, looking for configuration and vulnerabilities. Every single day. If new ones pop up, they look at the registers for all the autonomous systems and new IP addresses, and they check it all. They will scan through and index whatever's behind, whatever the IP address is in the front. So,
Colonel Smith, did you say that we're losing close to 3/4, if not $1 trillion annually in cybersecurity breaches in our intelligence agencies and data breaches, technology breaches? That was stunning when I read that.
So what happened was I retired in 2018 from active duty, and my boss, this senior executive service, kind of 3-star equivalent in my organization at DOT&E, asked me to stay on and help them with some what's called adversarial assessment, where you look at data sets and then figure out what the adversary knows and is doing, what they were trying to do, what they know now. And so they asked me to stay. I told them I'd give them a year, and that's what I did. And when I saw the data set, this was with a combined joint task force led by the FBI. We had our guys, there was a GS-15 lead out of DOT&E who was running the project. And then we had brought in a bunch of different technical experts. I was the one for a couple different things. So I knew quite a bit about cyber threats, although not as much as I did when we were done. And then I was also space systems. So if they were going after a specific technology, like for example, there was a space system where there was a technology involved in the sensors. And if that technology itself was compromised, if it was revealed what their sort of technical approach was, then it would compromise the whole system and make it vulnerable and non-combat effective.
Yeah.
And so we went looking for evidence that the adversary had gone and looked for specific information. And then we looked at how that affected their weapons and technology development efforts, so that we could then turn around and say, look, here's what's wrong with our procurement and development systems in terms of their protection approach. Here's what has been compromised and should just be canceled because it's no longer combat effective. And these are the forces and plans that are in jeopardy because they hinge upon or rely upon combat advantages or capabilities that have now been compromised. So that's what we did for about a year. And in the course of doing that, I saw that we had been suffering from the exfiltration, compromise, and access of just crown jewels of national security capability and technology for years. And that overlap went back into the Obama administration. And I was pretty furious. I mean, I was pretty angry. And I ended up being one of the 3 principal authors on 2 reports from that effort. The other one was a PhD that worked with Office of Naval Research and was also involved in test community. And the other was the GS-15 SES. At the end of that, the PhD was retiring anyway. But so we wrote 2 reports. One of them went directly to SecDef and the president. The second report should have gone the same path, but the new director of operational test and evaluation stated he was afraid that the report was too embarrassing to the military services because we basically explained how they had failed to protect their programs and technology and the impact of it. And so he wouldn't sign it out. It ended up getting distributed anyway for comment because it was a draft. And so it kind of got out. And eventually, after about 2.5 years, it resulted in some changes to defense procurement that should have happened a decade before or 5 years before or when we issued the report. But it's a very slow moving machine in the Department of Defense with a lot of inertia and kind of vested interest. But anyway, the PhD was retiring anyway, but the other 2 of us basically quit. The SES, I mean, the GS-15 said, I'm done. He walked away from his government civilian retirement and everything. And he was maxed out as a GS-15. So he's as highly as you could be paid without being senior executive service. He just quit and walked away. And I told them, I will not be doing any more of this work until you find that, that gentleman's spine. I think I said testicles, but if he's not willing to sign the reports, I'm not going to waste my time, with them. But yeah, in that we saw trillions of dollars, over the course of the time period of, exfiltrated, compromised intellectual property that was undermining the national security of the United States and just wasting national treasure. I was more worried. The treasure bothered me because, we always have other purposes, and that came from the sweat from, somebody's brow.
Yeah.
But Americans, citizens' labor. But what really bothered me, because I know the guys, I know the people I've trained, people I mentored, people I was responsible for, are going to be in jeopardy because our capabilities have been undermined by the failure to protect the intellectual property and the technology.
Well, Colonel Smith, it sounds, of course, we've believed that we were in some kind of irregular warfare for some time now. It seems very obvious from what you're saying that we are actively at war, that our adversaries are actively pursuing our demise. In your opinion, would you say that it was appropriate to classify our election systems as critical infrastructure?
That's a tough question. So it's sort of like asking whether it's appropriate to put an unaccompanied minor that crosses the border into the custody and care of an adult.
It should
It
never
really
happen in the
depends on the
first place.
adult.
It really depends
Yeah,
on the
okay.
adult.
Yeah, should they be here, and then who should they be with? Let's see, this
Yeah.
person's unrelated to them and has a history of sexual trafficking and abuse of minors. Should we put them into custody with them? The answer is no. So the problem with Jed Johnson's declaration in January of 2021 that placed election infrastructure underneath the critical infrastructure umbrella is that it provided no advantages of protection whatsoever. There are standards for critical infrastructure protection, including everything from encryption to the way that they're tested to verification of supply chain. None of those things happened, not one of them. The testing labs didn't change what they were doing. The voting system standards out of EAC didn't change. They didn't introduce any more experts. All they did was, remember the old Get Smart show, where the Agent 99 or whoever, 86 or whatever, and his boss would lower the dome of silence over them? That's all that happened with our election infrastructure. So we had decades really of independent investigations, and even occasionally media or Congress acknowledging or pursuing answers about the technology. And it's not just the voting systems, it's also, because of 2002 Help America Vote Act, the centralized statewide voter registration systems, which then become just the foundation for all the corruption and fraud, because they are so, the data is so corrupt and porous. But anyway, so you put everything underneath this umbrella, and then CISA and its non-governmental partners start providing strategic narrative messaging and propaganda support and reinforcement to all the officials. So now the people are being, gaslit about what's actually true. They're not hearing that, back in 2002, Bev Harris was explaining the problems with black box voting with voting systems, that the Collier brothers explained the problems, back in the early 90s, that Sheila Parks in 2012 explained the problems. I could go through a list of about 10 people who really in the majority explain the issues with the black box voting. And those issues have only gotten worse. But what happened is a shroud of secrecy suppressing that information descended. And it descended from the US government through media and through their non-governmental partners. And that, I think, began in earnest in January 2017, when the systems were put underneath that umbrella of critical infrastructure. And if there's a saying that if you want to know the purpose of something, look at what it does, not how it's described. Yeah. And so, look at what happened.
Colonel Smith, let me interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
There. Just to bring this down to the election level for a minute. When asked, the Louisiana Secretary of State says, well, this is a paper ballot system here that we're investing in because there's a paper receipt. And we always, make the counter argument on that. So could you clarify for our listeners, Colonel, what is the difference between a secure serialized paper ballot system and a machine that spits out a quote ballot?
Well, it's night and day. So, in the first place, the moment you involve computers for scanning in particular or tabulating, all bets are off. Because even if you start off, let's say you're a voter in Louisiana, and you go into the polling place on election day, which is the only reasonable way to conduct an election. If you're sent that ballot through the mail, it's not secure and nobody knows who got that ballot. They can't really track it. The whole idea that they're tracking where the ballots go, that's conducted through the Intelligent Mail Barcode System and the U.S. Postal Service's IBMTR service, which tracks the movement of the IMBs. That's just data. You could manipulate that data anyway. I could give you data that showed you that I shipped my entire house from here to Louisiana and then had it delivered in Hawaii the same day. You just know what they tell you. You don't know if any of it's true. It's just data on computers.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, if you come in to an election, office or voting center and they hand you a ballot, you fill it out and you hand it back to them. So far, so good, right? So far, you have a paper ballot that is the auditable record. It can be verified by anyone if citizens had access, which in a lot of places they've been deprived access
That's
to
right.
that verification. That's the basis of a valid election, is citizens looking at that paper ballot. Ideally, that paper ballot, I don't really care about most of the security measures. I do care about serializing. So serialized numbers like a ballot control number, and this was people in Florida and Louisiana, citizens came up with sort of the idealized way to do the ballot control numbers. In other words, not just a number on there, but a number that reflects the location, the year, the election type, and I mean location down to the county level. And that way, if you're the county election official and you look at those ballots, you know right away, is that one of my ballots or not? And have I already received that ballot or not? There's no way to double count and there's no way to mistake it for anything else. And it makes duplication of the ballots much more difficult because now you've got to figure out the range and then you've got to duplicate something that's not being used. So it's a method of controlling the ballots that's helpful. But then once you submit that ballot, once you cast it and give it to a sworn official, if it's not hand counted, if it's stuck into a machine, all bets are off. And the reason all bets are off is because, J. Alex Halderman and his graduate students proved that, I think it was called, their study when they published a report was called Unclear Ballot. They proved that you could run very lightweight software inside a scanner tabulating machine that could immediately, as the ballot was being scanned and the images were being saved, change the vote marks on the image of the ballot.
Wow.
So that, unless you go back to the paper ballot, you have no idea what was true. It's also possible that you can have, and this is where, people think this is esoteric. This is not esoteric. I've seen this done. Okay. So most scanner tabulators in most vendors' voting systems that are being used and sold in the United States have barcode and QR code scanners. So they are looking at paper that's going into the scanner tabulator for barcodes all the time. That's just a small application that's running. And the voting system testing labs are not testing that. They don't even have the capability to test that and look at what's being called up or what's being run as an application. They might tell you that it's just reading the results or the ballot type, but you have no idea because you can embed on that paper small marks, including in dropout colors, which all of the major vendors use dropout colors. So the image that you see, if you look at the image that was captured, doesn't reflect everything that was on the paper ballot.
Wow.
You can have colors that are not even being saved in that image that form, in effect, a QR code. And all you need is a single bit, or an 8-bit word, which could be just a few. They could look like flecks in yellow or red to the naked eye. But to that scanner tabulator, they can be an instruction that tells it to change its configuration. This is why it was Jeffrey Lindbergh found down in Coffee County, Georgia, that when they changed the color dropout settings on the Dominion, I think it was an ImageCast precinct tabulator, that it changed the way the tabulator handled the ballots.
Wow.
And it should never do that. It
Yeah.
should just change whether or not it drops the colors out. But what it was doing is it provided an indicator that there was some code that was being run on the basis of what was printed on the ballot that was changing the configuration of the system. So in other words, to make a very long story short, if you have good chain of custody on paper ballots that are cast by voters, you can audit or hand count them and have confidence in the results. And I would do it transparently. But once it touches a computer, all bets are off. You have no idea what's happening.
So would you be against, or what's your take on the uploading the ballots after the fact for visibility by the public? Because we've heard of that a lot.
I'm not against it. I don't think it's sufficient. And the reason it's not sufficient is because it depends on scanning again. What I would recommend, and what we've had several people demonstrate this. We host on COA's site. We're tracking all the hand count methods that citizens are developing. There's one down in Louisiana that they developed. There's one in Texas. There's another one in South Dakota that they're sharing. There's Missouri method, Linda Rance. We had our own that we developed a while. It was not quite as well developed as any of the others, but in all cases, we recommend that the entire process of receiving and counting and certifying ballots at the precinct be kept on camera. So in other words, from the time that ballot is cast by a voter, put into a ballot box, for privacy or secrecy, until the time that the election in that precinct is certified, that whole process should be on camera. And then the tallying itself should be on camera in such a manner that any citizen can go look at the precinct count and see the exact ballots being tallied, see the vote marks on the ballots, and see the tally as it is compiled by talliers that are looking at those ballots. That is 100% transparency, verifiable by citizens. Once you get away from that, I think, again, you have various degrees of insecurity and uncertainty, and citizens shouldn't be asked to tolerate any of it, because all of that is a trust me card that is not warranted by our government. If you studied history at all, and the founders knew, right, that power corrupts, that men are not angels, that they designed government for a couple things. They designed it to jealously guard its authorities against other branches and levels of government as a means of offsetting that accrual of power that always leads to tyranny, and that is, Lord Acton's rule about absolute power corrupting absolutely. And then they designed our government for a moral, informed, involved citizenry, and that's where we
are declining. What about the software codes of these systems? I'm sure it's the same in every state in the country, but state officials here, private citizens, do not have any access to these source codes, Colonel Smith, as I'm sure you're probably already aware of. In what world does a government that is implementing and securing the most important right that we have any right to prohibit us from viewing the source code that makes these entire systems work?
Yeah, I think no world, right? And constitutionally, it's not permissible, but we've gotten away in courts from making constitutional arguments. Instead, we rely upon the administrative statutes. And it's just like, if you read the constitutions of most states, they'd be very clear that the government is established and dependent upon the will and consent of the people. And the elections are the means of conveying that will and consent, but we allowed government administrators to, abstract the people away from control of the elections. Part of that was our own doing. And I say mea culpa because I wasn't involved the way I needed to be involved. I had a child's mindset that I would be able to walk away from government and not be involved again. And I also wasn't aware, I was focused on foreign enemies and that external national defense. And I made some assumptions which were not valid, which I should have known better. But once I realized, that we can't depend on government to police itself, which should be perfectly obvious. If you have any historical knowledge, right? Like, at what point should we trust the government?
Exactly.
No
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, certainly not something that our founding fathers didn't warn us about, calling
exactly.
government on its best day a necessary evil.
That's right.
They were profoundly skeptical of government.
You speak about our foreign adversaries. Can you talk a little bit more about the foreign adversarial connection to our election systems themselves? I think, they
Sure.
have very distasteful births, as I understand, but they've probably also really negatively impacted elections way beyond our borders as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say the state of the election systems worldwide, the corrupted, vulnerable, compromised state is definitely our fault in the United States. I mean, in 2000, when I was talking about, we were being attacked a million times a day,
Yeah.
the United States was so far ahead of any potential adversary from a cyber standpoint. It wasn't even close. It was like giants and Lilliputians. I mean, actual, bigger than human giant. We just dominated. There was nothing that we were not on top of in cyber, but they watched how we fought. And then, for craven, greedy reasons, we offshored and exported manufacturing. We allowed, millions of foreign citizens into our universities where they were involved in research, and then into even our defense and technology companies. So they have exported. We basically trained the world to do cyber, and we trained the world to do cyber for national security, including penetration and
Yeah.
compromise of it. We
So
did
they
that.
caught up. They caught up.
Yeah, they're still, so Russia always had some exquisite capabilities. Iran and North Korea have developed some exquisite capabilities. India has developed some exquisite capabilities. But in terms of capability and scale, People's Republic of China far outstrips the United States in terms of the scale of resources they've committed to the effort. I mean, they have organizations with thousands of people in them that do nothing but focus on compromise, exploitation, and access to Western technology. And they don't just do it here. It's not like war games where it's all, remote hacking in a dial-up modem. They're making our computers. So every single voting system vendor in the United States is using computers that were manufactured either entirely or in part overseas, mostly in People's Republic of China. You look at the largest election system vendors in the United States are ES&S, and then Dominion Voting Systems in that order, and then probably Hart InterCivic or
Civic.
Unison back and forth, and then Clear Ballot Group. And then the first thing you have to understand is they're all the same technology. So they're like converging into a single animal. So they started off with kind of two camps. There was the Urosevich brothers and GEMS, American Election Systems, Information Systems, that then kind of became, went into Diebold, which then they had so many problems with corruption that they renamed themselves Premier. At the same time, Sequoia Voting Systems stood up. And then you had ES&S established by Urosevich brothers. ES&S bought Premier, and then in 2010 through 12, the Department of Justice under President Obama forced both Sequoia, which had real issues because it was essentially Smartmatic technology. Smartmatic bought Sequoia. They had so many issues with the elections in Venezuela and otherwise, that corruption, that the Department of Justice forced Smartmatic to divest Sequoia and forced ES&S to divest the intellectual property from Premier, both to the same Canadian company that suddenly established a U.S. foothold and had zero election systems certified in the United States, Dominion Voting Systems.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you had, in a sense, an arms race between a establishment GOP-controlled voting system company, which was ES&S, to some extent Hart InterCivic, but that's more of a Texas homegrown. And then you had Dominion. So you had, one group controlling ES&S, one group controlling Dominion, but Dominion had the technology from Premier and from Smartmatic.
Yeah.
So they had the GEMS architecture and they had the architecture that was put in place by the Venezuelans in Smartmatic. So
Yeah. Every company that you named, by the way, Colonel, a number of the companies that you named are having their, we're undergoing certification process right now in Louisiana for these election machines. Most of the companies that you named are on there, but it's important to clarify for the listeners, and I think that you are, that there really isn't any computer-based voting system that is not vulnerable to hacking, no matter who the vendor is.
That's correct. Yeah, you can't. It could be done in theory. In the Department of Defense National Security Architectures, we used to use something called reduced instruction set computers, RISC computers. So these were processors that we had in weapon systems. And the reason you do that is so that they can't be compromised. They can't be corrupted. You very tightly control the design, and then you control the fabrication, and then you control the integration, and you control the access. And you do that for the entire design through operational use and retirement lifecycle. Or you conclude that you don't have control and know what they're doing. And I got to see this firsthand with the modernized GPS receivers and how they had to be produced and developed for the new GPS architecture, global positioning system.
Yeah.
They lost control of the design on the computers at the fabrication facility that was doing the prototypes for about 2 weeks. They didn't have security on it. They had to go back and validate literally every single mask and I'm talking about feature sizes that are 1/3000th, 1/4000th the size of a human hair. Those cannot be verified. There's nothing you can do with the naked eye. There's nothing you can do with a microscope. You need, electron scanning microscopes in order to determine what's true about a fabricated chip. You're better off just starting over, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
You could use a processor that was designed securely like that, and then if it only ran firmware, you couldn't alter, there was no way to alter software. You could design a system that would be secure in that manner. And I used to say we should do that for a scanner, for a ballot scanner. But then I realized the fatal Achilles heel in that is that you would still be asking citizens to trust somebody. And I don't want citizens to trust somebody because citizens cannot trust people.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think there are people that
We're
are trustworthy.
advised not
obviously.
to. We are advised not to.
Yeah, I think the best way to avoid trust issues and compromises is sunlight. And you can't have sunlight. If you say, this is why the problem with a lot of sort of more establishment election integrity organizations where they said, oh, we'll put more watchers in place. What are you going to look at from the outside of the computer?
Right,
Just more
exactly.
It's like
watching
Zoolander
fraud.
pounding on the computer on the desk. You know what's inside it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
never could understand that. The watchers, there's certain
Yeah,
things
that's a
beyond the
good computer.
detection of the watchers, for sure. No question.
Yeah. It'd be like having a gastroenterologist try to diagnose you by looking at the outside,
Exactly. Exactly. So do we have if you were advising the legislature, our legislature has oversight over the Secretary of State here in Louisiana, and they're supposed to be fiscally, regulating the SOS and also administratively. And what do you say if someone were to ask you why we shouldn't be investing $150 million of taxpayer money in machines in very simple terms, in terms of both cost and security?
Well, the primary argument is the primary argument, which is that they can't be trusted. There is no integrity in an electronic or computerized system. It can't be verified by a citizen. It can't be verified by the legislature. And so it'd be like, what is the most precious thing to you if you're a parent? It's your child. Imagine handing your child to somebody who you had not, background checked and couldn't background check. Imagine handing your child to the care of an individual whose credentials and character you could not verify and did not know. Only a fool would do it. There's a chance you would be okay, but really the greater chance is that, and there are predators among us, the greater chance is that a predator puts themselves in a position to have control over and be able to, affect your child.
Yeah.
That's the case with elections. If you're a legislator, unless you really have the cybersecurity credentials and background and knowledge, you are not going to be able to verify what is going on in those machines. And you shouldn't trust any of the people who've told you it's okay, right? I mean, CISA, at the same time CISA under Krebs was telling the American people, this is the most secure election in U.S. history, their own servers were compromised by the SolarWinds supply chain
That's
compromise. Right. Two different attacks, really. Sunspot and Supernova. Sunspot was access, Supernova was exploitation, much more dangerous. They had no idea that was happening for at least 10 months. The only reason CISA found out their own servers were compromised was because Mandiant's FireEye team had seen these indicators on their systems, and they advised CISA. And then the very first thing CISA did was advise all government agencies who had the capability to look for the indicators, take their systems offline, and image them. And this is critical because this is what we advised Clerk Peters to do on her voting systems in Mesa County. We told her you can't count on retaining all the artifacts for the audit trail based on the election project and the settings of the manufacturer. The only way to get whatever evidence is still left on there, or artifacts that would be an audit trail to verify the election results and process, is to image the systems. She wasn't allowed to do it herself. She had to get somebody else to do it. The county wouldn't help her. The Secretary of State wouldn't help her. So she got someone else to do it. They did it under her supervision. And that was the, crime that the Secretary of State, the whole establishment, the corrupt establishment, had to go after Clerk Peters, because that image is the goods.
Yeah, you testified, Colonel. You testified in Tina Peters' case as an expert, correct?
No, I was not called on. The judge, essentially, Judge Barrett, was not allowing defense testimony that would have been exculpatory to Clerk Peters. So we would have explained the standards in the system, the configuration of the system, how the system did not meet configuration standards, how it violated Colorado statute, that it should never have been certified or used, that the Secretary of State illegally directed modification, did not satisfy the statutory requirements, that it was configured to allow access from any computer in the world, that a system that wasn't allowed to connect to any system outside the boundary of the voting system had 36 wireless networking devices built into it as ordered by the vendor and approved by the Secretary of State. We would have testified to a lot of things that I think would have undermined the prosecution's case. And so Judge Barrett did not allow it in Clerk Peters' case.
Wow.
And Colonel Smith, on the topic of Tina Peters, do you think that the move earlier this week, the announcement by President Trump that Space Command is moving from Colorado to Alabama, do you think, is that a chess piece move to pressure the Colorado government to free Tina? Is that a first crack at it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't. What is it? The old radio show, Only the Shadow Knows What Evil Lurks in the Minds of Men. I don't pretend to know President Trump's mindset. And I think anybody who does that with another person, is probably not at full grasp of their own faculties. If, there's somebody who needs humility. If you think what's going on in somebody else's brain. What I do say, and I know a lot about basing, a lot about Space Forces, I personally never wanted to be stationed in Alabama. If I was going to be, I was at U.S. Spacecom headquarters when it was established before at Peterson Air Force Base, now Peterson Space Force Base. I was there when it was stood down and absorbed into Stratcom. I was glad that it was stood back up. I personally wouldn't have wanted to be assigned to Alabama. And there are reasons not to put it away from Colorado, but there are good reasons to move it out of Colorado. Like, you don't want all of your eggs in one basket that can be targeted all at once. It's not just targeting the people or like kinetic weapons. It's also, if you bring down the communications architecture in one location and you can cripple headquarters and contingency responses, that's very attractive for an adversary. So you want to diversify geographically.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, whether in addition to that, the president said, let's do this because Colorado is, doing something completely unethical and immoral in imprisoning Clerk Peters. I think, the main issue there, and we've talked about this, I've talked about this with her counsel for a long time. I've talked about this, publicly. She is a whistleblower. So when she first did the images, she wasn't a whistleblower. She was just doing her job. Her job was to retain those election records under both federal and state statute. She had an obligation. You can't do it through the processes that the Secretary of State provides. They're insufficient. Those systems are systematically, constantly overriding, which is destroying their own audit trail in the form of the log files. They're configured to do that, which is part of what makes the certification of the voting systems illegal. It's a very clear violation of the voting system standards that are a minimum standard under Colorado statute. And it's a violation of both federal and state statute to destroy those election records in the form of the audit trail. So preserving that audit trail was just her duty under state and federal law. But the moment it was clear from the image that the voting system itself violated state and federal law, Now she became a whistleblower. And that's what I've, advised for probably 3 years now is, look, she's a federal whistleblower. She needs to be brought into federal protection and used as part of the investigation into these voting systems, not just in Colorado, but there's nothing different about that in Colorado than it is everywhere the Dominion voting systems are used. And frankly, it's not very different from, Hart InterCivic, which had a whistleblower in 2007. It was Singer versus Hart InterCivic, filed in Colorado in federal court. It was a Ketam Fraudulent Claims Act claim where he said that the Hart InterCivic was making fraudulent claims about the integrity and accuracy of their systems. The ES&S systems sued by the California Secretary of State. ES&S systems included remote access software and hardware on their systems without disclosing, testing, or certifying. The Clear Ballot
Major
Group.
problems. Major
Oh
problems.
yeah. There's no vendor that's clean. I mean, Unison is owned outright by International Lottery and Totalizator, which is owned by Berjaya, which is a Malaysia registered company whose owner is very tight with Communist Party of China leadership. There's no voting system company in the United States, no vendor that I think is trustworthy, and certainly none of the technology is.
Let me ask you one other question that I know interests our listeners, because we're always talking about, Colonel, how vulnerable electronic voting machines are. That votes can be manipulated, switched back and forth, malware can be inserted and that sort of thing. But if someone were to ask you, how do we know, how does it happen? How does this happen inside of these machines? If you're saying that there can be someone sitting in Serbia who has the remote power to manipulate electronic voting results inside of a machine, how does that happen as simply as you can?
Well, so what is that Einstein said? Everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. It's the number of ways because these machines are so complex, the number of components, the manufacturing is unsecured because they have wireless and wired networking devices in them, because the voting system officials, the election officials, are asked and compelled to move media back and forth between those supposedly closed, controlled, certified boundary systems and then external systems like their county networks, which are also, poorly and inadequately secured by people who are not the first-rate cyber defenders in our country, right? I mean, honestly, the county and state people are typically just not good enough to defend against an advanced cyber capability, let alone one that had access to the hardware before it was ever even delivered in the United States. So there are almost infinite mechanisms by which unauthorized or malicious software functions could be introduced, including on the chipsets itself. So on most of these computers, they use an Intel chipset. And the Intel chipset, those are the CPUs for most US sold computers that are using Intel. Those are manufactured in the United States, done at the Chandler facility for a lot of them, like the Xeon processors. But all of that Intel processor technology has backdoors. It has a entirely separate chipset. It's almost like a separate computer running under the hood. If you look at that Intel chip, it just looks like a square. And then, that's like a heat shield and dissipation and protection. But you pull that off, and it's really a bunch of separate computer components inside there. And then you look inside those chips, and they're extraordinarily small, multi-layered, processing units. Well, there's a processor inside there in the Intel chipsets called, it's active management technology. It has different versions. It might be Management Engine, or it might be vPro. And that separate computer is designed for enterprise managers to be able to control, manipulate, and configure that computer without local access or without logging in or without administrator privileges. It's completely separate from the Windows operating system. So things it does, it has direct access to hardware and communications devices. Things it does are not being logged by the operating system. The operating system is blind to it. It's like that. It's the vPro and the ME capability, the active management technology, is like the hand up the back of the puppet. right? You're seeing the puppet's face,
Good
but
expression.
that's not what really has control over that system. And then the servers in the voting systems usually are using like Dell servers, and those have a capability built into them, integrated in the motherboard, called iDRAC, or Integrated Dell Remote Access uh, card. I'll have to think of Integrated Dell Remote Access. I think it's card. It might be capability. And iDRAC has just one purpose, and it's remote management and configuration of networks of computers that are connected to that server. So you have to ask yourself, why would you build wireless networking, remotely manageable chipsets, and Dell remote access capabilities into voting system components that are not supposed to have any remote access or management at all?
Great
That's
question.
deeply suspicious, right? So then the question of how exactly this is happening, there are so many different ways it could be happening. What you have to do, because you're not able to observe the systems in operation, nor can you can't after the fact, if you don't have supply chain security, you can't really after the fact go back and figure out what has been built in or cooked into computers. And the reason for that is because the feature size is so small. So if you don't know the exact triggers that will activate and allow unauthorized activity and functionality, like turning on a wireless networking device, or loading or integrating and assembling and then running some code, if you don't know exactly how it's done, it's very difficult to find the artifacts or evidence after the fact, especially because all of our voting systems are not logging everything they're supposed to be. And because citizens and real cyber forensic experts, independents, are not being given access for the most part. So you might find an indicator here or there. It's kind of like, to make it simple, imagine if you're trying to figure out if somebody has broken into a bank and stolen something from the bank. If you see the back door to the vault, if you see that the vault has a back door, if you see that the back door alarm has been disabled, if you see that the back door to the vault has been left open, you can then go through every single one of thousands of lock boxes if you knew what was in them, and inventory them and see if anything was stolen. But once you see that there's a back door built in, and you see that there's a system that's supposed to protect it that's been turned off, and you see the doors open, you can pretty much assume that something's been stolen. You may not know exactly what or how, but you know the system's not secure, and that should be enough. And that's where we're at with our voting systems.
Yeah.
As for, I could describe, probably off the top of my head, 10 different ways that you could corrupt voting systems and use them illicitly. So we've seen on some of the removable media used in US voting systems that they have a hidden encrypted partition. So a lot of times the vendors are providing the removable media, USB cards or compact flash cards or something. And we've seen on those that they have a partition that isn't even acknowledged or visible. And that partition could have complete programs on it that are executed when it's plugged in. So unbeknownst to the operator, you put a USB stick into your computer, you think you're transferring, audio files for ballot machines or something. And then in the background, the voting system that you plug it into, the election management system server, is automatically reaching into that hidden partition, executing some code there or integrating it with existing code, and it's running and it's changing results or changing data or eliminating, artifacts that would indicate some other compromise. And then when you pull that thumb drive or USB stick out, all evidence that it even happened is gone. You'd have to have had a snapshot of the database before and after the execution of the code to see what happened. This is why the third report in Mesa County was so important, because Jeff O'Donnell and Dr. Daugherty verified that there was a duplication made, which should never happen, of the election database in an active election, and that records were copied partially, in one case sequentially, in one case non-sequentially, and that copying completely broke the chain of evidence that linked the images and ballot records in that database to the paper ballots themselves. Could not be reproduced, which should result in an uncertifiable election result from the machine. It should immediately drive you back to look at the paper ballots prior to certification. But The voting system itself gave no indication to the election officials, certainly no indication to citizens. There was no warning, there was no artifact. It was only because of his prior expertise of both those gentlemen, Dr. Daugherty, who's a professor emeritus of I think computer science or mathematics at Texas A&M, and then Jeff O'Donnell, I don't know, 30 years as a full stack cyber engineer. It was only because of their expertise that they could reconstruct and verify what had happened. And that's why that Mesa image was so critical. And of course, nobody has ever refuted or addressed that report. The media has helped suppress it. Dan Rubenstein, the district attorney out there in Mesa County, did not address it. He did a little dog and pony show in front of the county commissioners with the first report, where he and his investigator, neither of whom have any cyber credentials, basically explained that they talked to Dominion and took their word for it. And then they gave some nonsense explanation, not under oath.
Yeah.
Colorado
Do you
Bureau
think,
of Investigations never did it. FBI never did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you expect President Trump to come out sooner rather than later with additional executive orders on these electronic voting systems?
Expect is a strong word. I would love it. I've been told that some of those are cooking. I've talked to a lot of the election integrity people around the country, and everybody who's had contact there. Sometimes we get asked to review or provide comment or provide support, like method and technique. And the kind of questions that we've been getting, I'm very hopeful. President Trump said that he wants to eliminate the voting systems and the mail-in voting. And I hope he does, because everything else that the administration is doing right now, whether it's saving kids or, pursuing and prosecuting the criminal acts of corrupt public officials, all of that is necessary and none of it is sufficient. If we don't restore integrity to our elections, then this is just a pause. This is an Indian summer before the next round of corruption begins. Because I think President Trump is maybe a once in a lifetime, maybe once in a couple lifetimes candidate. And because he is so independent, which I think is what they really fear about him, they don't control him. And because of that, I think he has the opportunity to do something that would restore citizen control of elections in a way that most candidates and officials never even have the chance to do. It's sort of like, the Berlin Wall falling after decades of Communist Party control. It's like your Winston Smith in 1984. The party has been in control of everything. The Uniparty has been in control of everything, and citizens have this window. And there's a lot that they're doing that's important, but I don't think anything they're doing is as important as restoring election integrity, because that's really, other than the Second Amendment, that's our mechanism for accountability with our government.
Yeah, you're 100% right. As you look at it, based on the fact that the Uniparty's been in control, pretty much unfettered for at least my lifetime, probably far longer than that. How many of our sitting quote unquote elected officials do you think are they're legitimately, meaning they're uncontrolled, not legitimately as in we can verify the election? Because I don't think that's necessarily possible.
That's a good question. So I couldn't wait to leave DC and come back. What I described it as coming back to the United States. I didn't even live in DC, and I mostly worked outside of DC in Alexandria, but I had lots of contact with DC people, and it attracts some of the best people in the country and many of the worst. And I would say, you might find 0.1% among the normal population, the rest of the country, who are some kind of sociopath. In DC, it's like 10-15% of the people. I mean, there's just a lot of corrupt people.
Yeah.
And people who are just genuinely malicious and wholly self-interested. And I think it's true in Congress as well. You've got so many incumbents and the system is so corrupt. I think it's very difficult to tell. I like to look at people like Ken Buck came out of Colorado, and he and Thomas Massey, they started doing this series called The Swamp, where they talked about all the fundraising and just how corrupt all that was. And then it just got real quiet. They just stopped talking about it. And so I think you have a combination of a large proportion of people there who are selected. They have been allowed, they've been encouraged, they've been nurtured, they've been allowed through the process, through the filters, because they would play ball. And then for anybody who doesn't play ball, I think they try to compromise them there. Like, remember they did that with I can't remember the kid from, I think it was North or South Carolina, at the
Yes.
wheelchair, who talked about the
Yeah.
parties they tried to get him to.
Madison Cawthorn.
That's right, Madison Cawthorn.
Yeah.
And then why has there been, I'm confident that in the Epstein files, if that implicated or incriminated President Trump, it would have been released 1,000 times already, right? Would the Biden administration really have withheld? I don't think so. But they were silent back then, and now they're very vocal. But just about President Trump, I suspect that it compromises or reveals a compromise of many other public officials, and that's partly why there's been so little appetite for the release. And at this point, they've had control of the documentation artifacts for a long time. CIA can manufacture evidence, right? That community can manufacture evidence on anybody. They did it against what was the guy, Paul Manafort, right? The black box or the black book was manufactured, right? That's been now demonstrated. And so, I understand a little bit. I'm very frustrated, but I understand a little bit the reluctance to release all the Epstein information because you don't know what's true among it, what isn't. But I think what we can rest assured of is that that was an operation to compromise people. And they don't go around trying to compromise people who don't have power and ability to do what they want.
Right.
They compromise people who have power. So
Very
how
true.
much of Congress, the short answer, how much of Congress? I don't know. I think it'd be a good idea to start over. I think it'd be a good idea to have, clean slate elections, to impose term limits, and to have elections with election integrity and see what we get. Because I believe it will be much different than what we've been seeing for the last 30 to 50 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Is the paper ballot movement gaining traction? Are you seeing spots of light?
It is. And if you want to know how it's sort of gaining foothold and traction, look at the voices coming against it. So as the people afraid of it get more and more afraid, there'll be a lot more gnashing of teeth and wailing, right? There's, oh my God, you can never do it. It's gonna take forever. It'll cost so much money. How can you trust people? Right? Everything except let's just demo it for you. And so
They're just not interested. Exactly.
We've been accused of taking us back to the Stone Age by one of our Congress members.
We absolutely, no question, we have been. Well, Colonel Sean Smith, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know our listeners are going to benefit from what you're talking about here, and it's a really acute level of expertise that you have on this issue, and being able to articulate the vulnerabilities of these machines is invaluable to us. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was my privilege. You take care.
Thank you so much, Colonel Smith. We look forward to having you back soon, too.
I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll just take a quick break here. If you're looking to invest in physical precious metals or convert your 401k to a precious metals backed IRA, please consider making your investment with our trusted partner, MetalStacks. Their prices regularly beat the big sites, and they have no credit card fees or minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. Just visit metalstacks.com/dwalker or get there from our website, freedomstate.us. If you're interested in the IRA conversion, drop me a message at Danielle@freedomstate.us and I can get you connected with their white glove service. How great was that, Chris?
Unbelievable. And I'm so glad that we got someone to be able to explain how a machine generated piece of paper is not a secure serialized paper ballot system, as Nancy Landry continues to say, which is, just a gross misnomer. I'm glad we had someone to explain that and to go into the kind of depth that he went into regarding the vulnerabilities of these computers. I mean, this is a guy who worked in the highest branches of the government, Danielle. I mean, he basically was, one of the main administrators on our missile defense system. This is high-tech stuff. So when he says something like your voting systems are vulnerable and your electronic computers are vulnerable, we have to listen to him.
Yeah, and Chris, as he was talking and describing kind of that shroud that has come over our elections since the declaration of them being critical infrastructure at the federal level, I was just struck by this kind of analogy that it's so similar to the way that COVID was handled. You have to trust the experts. You don't have the right to question. You need to just trust what's in the shot. You need to trust the masks. You need to trust the test. Well, no, I don't have to actually, as a sovereign individual in charge of my own body, actually. I can ask those questions. And I think the time and the activity from people, the momentum of heart from people now is I will assert my right to ask questions. I will assert my right to reject the premise. And that's exactly where we need to be, because for our elections and for our personal health, we can't trust the experts.
We absolutely cannot trust the expert. And it's such an interesting parallel you drew between the COVID response and now the response with regard to the election systems. It's like the experts are all in the same group and they're all telling us what to do and what to believe and what to accept while never showing us the evidence.
And the
That is
experts were groomed and taught by communist China. I
Well,
mean,
exactly, exactly. Very, very, very well trained and well groomed. This is one of those things, Danielle, where there's no question that these machines are vulnerable. There's no questions that they have swung votes back and forth. We just have to do something to prevent this mass investiture of our money.
yeah. Well, on that note, Chris, we can just mention that and encourage anyone watching or listening later to participate under protest at the Horse and Pony Show, as I call it, next week, Tuesday and Thursday at the Old Governor's Mansion, starting at 9 a.m. Uh, Both of these names were mentioned by Colonel Smith just now. Tuesday, they will be demoing the Clear Ballot, Clear Vote voting system, and Thursday is ES&S. So would really strongly encourage public participation in that. I think it's very important that the apparatus of our state understands that we are in strong opposition to this, and in no way are assenting or condoning the moving forward of this. I don't know if you have
Absolutely.
additional thoughts on that,
And I
Chris.
think and I think in increasing numbers, Danielle, because of program podcasts like the State of Freedom
Yeah.
and others, I think increasing numbers of people are understanding what really is glaringly obvious to anybody, even if you're not a computer expert. There's not a computer in the world that can't be hacked through sophisticated cybersecurity hackers. It's ridiculous. I think Jenin would know that
Yeah.
as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
So we have to, but yeah, I agree with you about protesting in every way possible. We still have our call to action up, Danielle, on lacag.org regarding a secure hand-marked paper ballot system. So I'd encourage you to go to lacag.org Action Center and do that call to action.
Yeah, and like I said at the outset, Colonel Smith is far, far overqualified to explain this. So even if we don't have Colonel Smith's level of expertise, you can certainly convey that. This is my favorite analogy. If you go to Taco Bell, which I would not recommend, but if you go to Taco Bell and you get your order and they give you a receipt, do you have to wonder, is this a receipt or a ballot? No, you do not have to wonder if it's a receipt or a ballot. It's obviously a receipt. So whenever you go into a voting machine and it spits something out at the end, do you have to wonder, is this a receipt or a ballot? No, you do not. So I don't know why that's so difficult for people who are involved in this process to understand, Chris, but perhaps you understand. Do you have any thoughts?
I'm starting to believe, Danielle, that this might be getting into willful obtuseness,
Yeah,
willful blindness, unfortunately, because they are apparently too deeply invested
yeah.
administratively, financially. But
Don't
I
hang your hat on the word paper, because
don't
that's
hang
not
your
the that's not where it starts and stops. You have to
That's
do
not
the
where it
full
starts and
measure.
stops. You got to do the full measure. Exactly. Well, we're going to continue to follow Danielle, and and I want to encourage people to go to support the State of Freedom. Subscribe, donate, and share, because we are truly building quite a network across Louisiana to reach Louisiana citizens about issues that are so important to them, Danielle. You
We
know
are.
that, and we were the only source for many of those things that people know that are so important. So we're so
Yep, and
thankful
that's
for the many listeners we have.
in no small part thanks to LACAG. So please also support the work of LACAG at lacag.org and do the calls to action there, because we have not stopped just because the legislature is out of session. There's plenty of work that we can be doing, plenty of advocacy that we are doing right now. And please also join us right back here Tuesday, same time, same place. We will be joined by Draza Smith. She is another expert voice on election systems. She's a computer engineer who's done comprehensive statistical analysis on vote counts, including those in Louisiana. And she is going to come and explain the manipulation and the lack of trustworthiness of what those machines are spitting out. So please, you won't want to miss that.
Yep, as the dad of one of my old country friends growing up said, we want to know what we're stepping in here, boys. And right now, Danielle, we really do not. But I love you, and we shall reconvene, and baying we shall go.
Perfect. See you on Tuesday, Chris. Thank you so much.
You bet.
The secret to losing weight 2 times faster has gone viral. See the transformations hundreds of thousands of men, women, and teens are experiencing around the world with the Slenderize drops. These homeopathic hormone balancing drops are proven to control appetite, support thyroid function, improve energy, boost mood, and increase metabolic rate. To learn more about the drops or other incredible natural wellness and lifestyle products, email me at danielle@freedomstate.us or visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.